particularly in the countries most impacted by insecurity. I would also refer to the progressive weakening of regional cooperation, as well as challenges to the peace process, primarily in Mali. The current situation in this region should lead us collectively to consider the choices made by the international community over the past 10 years. We should draw lessons so that the next 10 years will not be considered a lost decade. In point of fact, the people of the region will pay for these mistakes. This situation reminds us as well that there is no short-term miracle solution. Our immediate actions, therefore, must be part of a medium and long-term approach to promote structural change for our West African societies. And on this point, I would like to share with you some thoughts which I and my team in our institution, the ISS, have discussed. There are two trends, namely growing insecurity and the management of military transitions. We hope that these thoughts will be useful to members of the Council.
Excusez-moi.
I apologize, just a moment.
Les travaux de l'ISS.
In the work done by the ISS, we've interviewed hundreds of people linked to terrorist groups in the affected countries of the region, and we've determined that armed groups operating in the Sahel in 2012 were already supplying their groups primarily with fuel from some coastal countries and by selling stolen cattle or gold from clandestine gold mining to finance some of the coastal countries. And this was well in place before terrorist attacks took place in that country. While recalling the importance of continuing to invest in prevention, our work has shown that because we considered the Sahel lost, we needed to redirect our efforts and the resources towards the coastal countries. But that is misguided thinking, and the repercussions will have a lasting impact on the well-being of people as well as on the security and stability of the region. We therefore must urgently rethink our answers, bearing in mind the connectivity and the interdependence of all of these spaces and the multidimensional nature of the supply chain and of financing and recruitment which fuel insecurity. The expression, the spillover from the Sahel to the coast, has been seriously underestimated. On the question of human resources, and just to close on this first trend, I would insist on the importance of anticipating the inevitable withdrawal of terrorist groups. Let me explain. Sooner or later, people linked to or associated with active terrorist groups in the Sahel and in the coastal countries will try to get out. That was the case in the Lake Chad Basin, where combatants from the various Boko Haram factions withdrew following military victories of governments in the region, following a process of dialogue and violent fighting between rival terrorist groups, or they withdrew simply because they'd grown weary of violence. States in the region and African sub-regional organizations, as well as the United Nations, therefore should be preparing now for that possibility. And in order to do that, we need to draw on lessons learned, sometimes good or bad lessons, in the disarmament, demobilization, repatriation, reintegration, and reinstallation process in the Lake Chad Basin countries. I'm thinking in particular of calls for withdrawal and coordination at the national and regional level, addressing gender-specific issues and the needs of the community, as well as setting up appropriate legal systems. Therefore, we must create additional spaces for exchanges where these experiences, which have the potential to make a significant contribution to reducing conflicts in the region, could be introduced, discussed, built upon, and adjusted in different contexts. Let me turn now to the second and last trend, namely managing ongoing transitions. More or less 10 years ago, Mali, Burkina, Niger, and Guinea were already in transition after such a constitutional change of government. This yo-yo effect and the fact that for some of these countries, and in some of these countries, these cycles are increasingly short, means that we need to provide some kind of support for transition. We must take a preventive approach to avoid creating conditions for a subsequent coup d'etat. In order to optimize the results of ongoing transitions, we have to look at the composition of the groups, not just the length of time in office, by identifying areas where progress could be achieved despite the context. To date, ECOWAS, the UN, and the African Union, as well as other outside actors, have put pressure on the military authorities to make sure these transitions are short and are led by civilians. But that makes respectively 40, 28, and 23 months that the military authorities in Mali, Guinea, and Burkina Faso have been in power. These extended transitions and often repeated transitions have become transitions of an indeterminate length, and this has an impact on elections. And the time, therefore, has come to be pragmatic. There are many challenges, and the challenges have been clearly pointed out by the SRSG, but we have opportunities as well. They may be limited, but we need to be able to identify and take advantage of these situations to lay the foundation to address recurrent insecurity and to make sure that there is no backsliding. That goal means that we must keep our eye on the situation beyond post-state coup elections, and we must even reassess the preventive mechanisms. But be aware, the goal here is not to encourage long-standing military transitions. In democracy, we all agree that the role of the military is not in the presidential palace. Their presence in power must be brief. And returning to constitutional order must remain our key objective. It cannot be an end in itself or the only criterion for success. I will stop here, and I thank you very much for your kind attention. I'd like to thank Ms. Lauriane Theroux-Benoni for her briefing, and I would now like to give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the members of the A3 Plus, namely Algeria, Guyana, Mozambique, and my country, Sierra Leone. Allow me to thank our briefers, SRSG Leonardo Santos Simao and Ms. Lauriane Theroux-Benoni, for their important contributions. The A3 Plus welcomes the report of the Secretary General on the activities of UNOWAS and avail ourselves of this opportunity to commend the efforts of SRSG Mr. Leonardo Santos Simao in actively engaging with the countries of the region. We encourage and support his further efforts in the implementation of the UNOWAS mandate and sincerely thank him for his briefing, as I had already mentioned today. Mr. President, since the last briefing to this Council and the renewal of the mandate of UNOWAS, we have seen the consolidation of democracy in Côte d'Ivoire, Liberia, Nigeria, and Sierra Leone, as well as the positive development regarding transitional justice in the Gambia. We particularly wish to highlight the progress on women's representation and participation in the political space in Côte d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone, with both countries implementing and exceeding the quotas in their affirmative action policies and legislations. We underscore the need for countries undergoing political transition to adhere to their electoral timelines and ensure democratic consolidation and good governance, the rule of law, respect for human rights, gender equality, sustainable development, and the inclusion of civil society in democratic processes. The A3 Plus therefore welcomes the relevant and fruitful discussions on the issue of unconstitutional changes during the African Union High-Level Seminar on the Promotion of Peace and Security in Africa, held on 17 to 18 December 2023 in Oran. We note that the referendum held in Mali in June 2023 set out a pathway for further efforts based on an inclusive process. We reiterate the centrality of the 2015 agreement on the peace and reconciliation in Mali, resulting from the Algiers process, and strongly urge all signatory parties to resume dialogue and commit to the implementation of the agreement. We also call on Mali to remain engaged with regional organizations, ECOWAS, the African Union, in realizing peace and stability in Mali. The A3 Plus welcomes the revitalization of the Nouakchott process and reaffirms the importance of coordination of all efforts at regional and sub-regional levels, especially in the fight against terrorism and organized crime in the Sahel and other regions. In this regard, the A3 Plus would like to underscore the roles of the African Center for the Study and Research on Terrorism, the Committee of Intelligence and Security Service of Africa, the African Union Mechanism for Peace Cooperation, the Joint Operations Staff Committee, and the Accra Initiative. We commend the SRSG for its effort at alleviating pre- and post-election tensions in Liberia and Sierra Leone, respectively, and call for the implementation of all agreed outcome documents. We are also encouraged by the individual visit of the SRSG to two of the A3 Plus countries, namely Sierra Leone and Algeria, to address and develop solutions for sustainable consultative dialogue and pathways to development. The A3 Plus, however, continues to express grave concern over the security situation in the region, especially in the Sahelian countries, where the occupation of territories by terrorists and criminal armed groups leads to an increase in displacement and a deterioration in the humanitarian situation. We further note with concern the growing disengagement with ECOWAS and the security vacuum created by MINUSMA's withdrawal. We also take note of the dissolution of the G5 Sahel. While taking this opportunity to strongly affirm our respect for the territorial integrity and sovereignty of all countries of the region, we call on those countries to engage in dialogue with ECOWAS in a bid to create inclusive solutions to the issues that affect the region. Against this background, we would like to make the following key observations. First, on the political situation. We regret the rising political tensions caused by the shift from democratic to unconstitutional change of government in some countries in the region. We encourage all countries to fulfill their obligations under regional arrangements such as the ECOWAS Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance and the African Union Declaration on the Framework for the OAU Response to Unconstitutional Changes of Government, premised on a participatory approach to governance, including youth, women, and all relevant stakeholders. We welcome the commitment of the SRSG and its team in close collaboration with regional stakeholders to implement the decisions in the communique of the 64th Ordinary Meeting of the Authority of the Heads of State and Government of ECOWAS, held on 10 December 2023. We reiterate the need for the current transitional authorities to restore constitutional order, while reiterating the need for continuous engagement between the UN, the AU, and ECOWAS to ensure required support towards enhancing governance and the rule of law in these countries. Secondly, on the security situation. We regret the growing incident of terrorism and violent extremism in West Africa and the Sahel. The spread of terrorism from the Sahel to coastal states remain a major concern. We continue to unwaveringly condemn attacks by terrorists and violent extremist groups against civilians and security personnel in the region and pay tribute to those who lost their lives in those attacks. With the closure of MINUSMA, we urge coordinated action with the neighboring countries to minimize any further adverse security impact on Mali and the region. The role of the sub-regional, regional UNOWAS and other UN agencies therefore becomes even more critical in this context. We note with concern the shrinking of civic and political space in the region and urge the scaling up of preventive mechanisms and diplomatic mediative measures to address this problem. We are also seriously concerned about the reported upward trajectory of maritime insecurity incidents in the Gulf of Guinea, following years of decreased instances of piracy and armed robbery at sea. In this regard, we urge cooperation and collaboration in the implementation of the frameworks to address maritime insecurity in the Gulf of Guinea, including the Council's Resolution 2634. Thirdly, we regret the dire humanitarian situation in the region, particularly in the Central Sahel areas. The A3+ calls for the attention of the international community on the situation which, according to OCHA, has left over 26.1 million people in the Sahel region in need of humanitarian assistance and protection in 2023, a 24% increase from the previous year. We are deeply concerned that reportedly 5.3 million people in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are food insecure as of December 2023, while 1.8 million children in the region suffer from acute malnutrition. Further, school closures caused by insecurity have left children exposed to the risk of sexual exploitation and recruitment by terrorists and criminal armed groups. We continue to call for donor partners to prioritize the implementation of humanitarian response plans for countries in West Africa and the Sahel by helping to meet the $3.5 billion United States target required to tackle the increasing humanitarian needs, of which only 36% has been received as of December 2023. Mr. President, on climate change and its adverse implications for the region, we reiterate the firm belief that the prevailing crises in the region are aggravated by this phenomenon, which has led to, among others, displacement and competition over declining natural resources, for example, between farmers and herders. We welcome progress made in the implementation of the Dakar Call to Action on Climate Change, Peace, and Security, which calls for the United Nations system, including UNOWAS, UN country teams, the Climate Security Mechanism, and ECOWAS, to continue working with regional and national partners to support regional government in this field. Finally, we urge for a comprehensive approach that addresses the root causes and take equal cognizance of the socio-economic challenges in West Africa and the Sahel. This requires support to address the governance and development deficits and commitment to building a national consensus that will ensure meaningful participation by women and youth in decision-making and governance processes. To conclude, the A3+ is prepared to engage with fellow council members towards the issuance of a presidential statement on UNOWAS, given the significant development in the sub-region and the importance of the council adopting a consensus approach to the relevant issues, as well as in order to demonstrate full support to the mandate of the SISG. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to welcome the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Mr. Leonardo Santos Simão. I thank him for his statement and for the invaluable work of his office. And of course, I also thank Ms. Lauriane Terou Benoni for her statement and for the valuable information provided. The signs of continued strengthening of democratic governance and the positive advances in transitional justice in some of the region's countries, as my colleague from Sierra Leone has mentioned, are encouraging. However, today's briefing underlines that the security situation, particularly in the Sahel, remains worrying. In addition, humanitarian needs continue to grow. On the political front, some transitional processes towards a return to constitutional order are not progressing as planned, and we have faced a new coup d'etat and several attempts in 2023. According to the United Nations Charter, the Security Council is mandated to take measures for the prevention and removal of threats to peace. Prevention is the most effective way to avoid new conflicts and the escalation of existing crises. This is why the Secretary General has placed such emphasis on prevention in his new agenda for peace. Given the importance of stability and prosperity in West Africa and the Sahel, several areas require urgent preventive action by the international community, specifically to prevent another lost decade and instead create a decade of opportunity. Firstly, in terms of governance, specifically through inclusive elections, a large number of elections took place in West Africa in 2023, most of them peaceful. In Nigeria, Switzerland supported national partners to reduce electoral violence during campaigns and elections, thus enabling a peaceful outcome. We also welcome the progress made in women's representation in political bodies following the elections in Cote d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone. We support the Secretary General's call to promote and implement legislation on women's empowerment and gender equality. We are also pleased that UNOWAS is supporting Burkina Faso, Ghana, Mali, Mauritania, Senegal, and Togo ahead of their elections this year. This important work includes institution building, the promotion of democratic governance, and general electoral processes and cycles. Secondly, the security situation remains fragile in some regions, with recurrent attacks on the civilian population by armed jihadist groups. With the withdrawal of MINUSMA and the end of the G5 Sahel, the Security Council needs to pay more attention to the region. Now is not the time to disengage. It is crucial to better combine multinational, regional, and bilateral commitments in order to mitigate the risk of a deepening regional crisis. This must be done in close collaboration with the African Union and sub-regional organizations. Thirdly, we continue to face a humanitarian crisis exacerbated by instability, conflict, forced displacement, and climate change. The ever-increasing humanitarian needs, coupled with diminishing resources and access challenges, often due to insecurity, are impacting the population. According to the Secretary General's report, over 26 million people in the Sahel require vital assistance, but only 36% of the humanitarian response plan is funded. Switzerland has contributed to the plan, for example, by meeting the food and nutritional needs of over 1 million people in Mali in 2023. Finally, climate change and its consequences for security in West Africa and the Sahel are a reality that cannot be ignored. The region suffers disproportionately. Switzerland, as raised during the stake-in that preceded this briefing, welcomes the progress made by UNOWAS in implementing the Dakar call to action. Ongoing analysis of climate security risks and a better understanding of the link between climate peace and security must be an integral part of measures towards sustainable peace. This is particularly important to help the most vulnerable countries adapt to the effects of climate change. Mr. President, the Security Council must take its responsibility to act preventatively seriously. It must support the United Nations effectively in applying the full range of diplomatic, humanitarian, sustainable development, and peace-building tools. As a co-pen holder with Sierra Leone, Switzerland will make efforts towards a presidential statement in order to stress the Council's strong interest in the region. Through this initiative, we wish to reiterate our joint support for the important work of UNOWAS in all areas of its mandate. I thank you. I thank the representative of Switzerland for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Special Representative Samel, for your briefing. And thank you, Ms. Teru Benoni, for your presentation. The United States remains gravely concerned about democratic backsliding across the region and strongly supports UNOWAS and its instrumental role in preventing and mitigating conflict, addressing election-related crises, and promoting inclusive dialogue processes in the region. We recognize the continued efforts of UNOWAS to help promote and sustain democratic processes. The UNOWAS mandate is now even more important, considering the MINUSMA drawdown. It is critical that the transition government of Mali fully cooperate with the UN to ensure a safe and orderly liquidation of MINUSMA. This includes fully respecting its continuing obligations under the Status of Forces Agreement. We strongly support the continuation of UN good offices in Mali and support to mediation, the Algiers peace process, and the political transition. We encourage the UN to continue working closely with the transition government and to swiftly recommend an appropriate transfer of specific tasks formally assigned to MINUSMA to UNOWAS and the UN country team. We regret the dissolution of the G5 Sahel owing to the withdrawal of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. While we continue to support the Secretary General's recommendation to terminate the reporting obligation on MINUSMA's support to the G5 Sahel Joint Force, we firmly believe this should be balanced by an increase in the number of UNOWAS reports the Council receives per year. This Council needs more, not less, visibility on a region that, as the Secretary General notes, requires fresh approaches to its complex security threats and development needs. The United States recognizes and appreciates the release of Salam Bazoum. We look forward to progress on the release of former President Bazoum and others unjustly detained following the military coup d'etat. We encourage negotiations between Niger's National Council for Safeguarding the Homeland and ECOWAS, and we look forward to an agreement with actionable items for a quick and credible timeline to usher in democratic governance in Niger and restore peaceful cooperation between Niger and its neighbors. We welcome Sierra Leone to the Council, applaud its actions to implement the terms of the Agreement of National Unity, and support the speedy progression on this important process. We also want to underscore the need for UN resident coordinators in Burkina Faso and Niger. Resident coordinators lead the UN's work to support development efforts and are vital to the delivery of much-needed humanitarian assistance to support all people. We remain deeply concerned by growing instability in coastal West Africa, exacerbated by internal political tensions and terrorism and violent extremism in the Sahel, which remains an epicenter globally for terrorism-related deaths. Terrorists know no borders, and instability in the Sahel cannot be addressed effectively without collaboration among regional states. We look forward to the Secretary General's Africa Counterterrorism Summit in Abuja, where we can discuss enduring solutions to these shared threats. We cannot ignore the fact that the Wagner Group is committing human rights abuses and endangering the safety and security of civilians, peacekeepers, and UN personnel. Its presence and operations are inhibiting the work of the UN, and not only failing to address the immediate terrorist and violent extremist threat, but also exacerbating popular grievances, contributing to the likelihood this threat will grow. Finally, the United States calls on members of the Security Council to reinvigorate collective action to support our African partners in addressing the problems that cross borders. We applaud UN, UNOWAS, the AU, and ECOWAS efforts to support the region, and would support a presidential statement to reaffirm the Council's commitment to UNOWAS and West African security. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie le représentant.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I extend my gratitude to Special Representative Mr. Simao and Ms. Daru Benoni for their informative briefings today. At the outset, in light of the recent withdrawal of MINUSMA, the Republic of Korea commends the dedication of MINUSMA personnel who tirelessly executed their mandate amid challenging conditions. We also appreciate the work and efforts of UNOWAS and its active engagement in the region, particularly in executing its good offices and building bridges between regional, sub-regional organizations, ECOWAS in particular, and the governments of the region. As the Secretary General pointed out in his report, West Africa and the Sahel is a fast-evolving region with heightened political tensions and instability. The region faces overlapping challenges of violent extremism, trafficking, transnational organized crime, and the adverse impacts of climate change, aggravating an already dire humanitarian situation. In light of these circumstances, I wish to emphasize 3 points. First, establishing strong and inclusive democratic governance is essential to bringing stability in the region. The Republic of Korea applauds progress in Liberia and Gambia, where elections and transitional justice reforms have been conducted peacefully. However, the slow restoration of constitutional order in transitional governments of several countries in West Africa and the Sahel are deeply concerning. We urge all countries undergoing political transitions to adhere to a timely return to constitutional order in collaboration with ECOWAS following the December summit. We expect UNOWAS to continue to play a significant role in this regard. Along this process, civic space and the full and meaningful participation of women should be ensured at all levels. Second, widespread insecurity in the region remains deeply concerning. According to the Global Terrorism Index report of 2023, the Sahel is among the most affected regions globally, witnessing a surge by 20 times in terrorism-related deaths over the past 15 years. In recent months, heightened insecurity has been observed in the Central Sahel countries, particularly against the backdrop of the withdrawal of MINUSMA and disbanding of the G5 Sahel and its joint force. This situation poses an imminent risk of insecurity spreading to coastal states of West Africa. It is important that the international community closely keep an eye on the region to prevent a security vacuum and seek new and effective approaches to address security threats and terrorism. Therefore, it is imperative for the Security Council to sustain its continued engagement in the region. The Republic of Korea encourages the countries of the region to strengthen cooperation and welcomes increased regional security coordination through initiatives such as the Accra Initiative. At the same time, in any military operation addressing insecurity, human rights and international humanitarian law should be strictly adhered to. Third, the humanitarian situation continues to remain dire, with over 30 million people in urgent need of life-saving assistance in the Sahel. Addressing the root causes of conflict requires a comprehensive approach within the HDP nexus and with focus on prevention. The Republic of Korea has supported peace-building projects totaling $20 million over the last few years to the countries of the Sahel to help these countries build resilience against fragility. In this regard, Korea supports close collaboration between the PBC and the Security Council. In addition, climate change exacerbates existing vulnerabilities, further jeopardizing peace and security in the region. UNOWAS is uniquely placed to comprehensively address this transboundary challenge with wide-ranging partnerships. The Republic of Korea encourages its collaboration with the countries in the region, regional organizations, relevant UN entities, international financial institutions, private sector, and civil society. We also emphasize the need to continue and increase supporting relevant expertise of the mission, including the Climate and Security Advisor. In concluding, the Republic of Korea reaffirms its unwavering support for the work of Special Representative Simao, UNOWAS, and the regional organizations in consolidating peace in West Africa and the Sahel. We also join A3+, Switzerland, and other members in calling for the adoption of a presidential statement to underscore our support for UNOWAS mission. I thank you, Mr. President.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Mr. President, I thank Special Representative Simao and Ms. Benoni for their briefings. Since last year, the countries of West Africa and the Sahel have made considerable efforts to maintain peace and stability in the region. China is pleased to see that Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and Cote d'Ivoire have successfully completed their elections, while Senegal and Togo are fully engaged in political dialogue, which have yielded positive results. However, the situation in the region continues to face multiple difficulties and challenges. The political situation in some countries remains volatile, with growing social tension internally. This year, general elections are scheduled in several countries in West Africa, and the political transition and peace processes in Mali, Niger, and other countries have entered a critical phase. China supports regional countries in bridging their internal differences through political dialogue so as to create conditions for peace and reconciliation. It is important to bring confidence and hope to the people through improving governance and strengthening state authority. The international community should support regional countries in independently choosing their own path of development in accordance with their own national conditions. To impose governance models from the outside and engage in democratic transformation has proved of no value in addressing the root causes of unrest and has in some cases led to new chaos. China supports the constructive role that ECOWAS continues to play in regional affairs. Efforts by UNOWAS to support the political and peace processes in Mali and other countries should be carried out in line with the will of the countries concerned and should form synergy with those deployed by ECOWAS. Mr. President, countries in West Africa and the Sahel have long been at the forefront of the international counterterrorism struggle, and countries including Nigeria, Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso have been proactive in countering terrorism and maintaining stability. They have made tremendous efforts and sacrifices in doing so. At the summit held last month, ECOWAS reaffirmed its commitment to speeding up the deployment of the standby forces and conducting joint counterterrorism operations. These efforts deserve our recognition. However, at the same time, extremist and terrorist activities remain rampant. While counterterrorism cooperations in the Sahel region find itself in a difficult situation at the moment, in face of the common challenges, the countries of the region should uphold the vision of common security, close ranks in counterterrorism cooperations, and fortify each and every chain along the counterterrorism front. The international community should take stock of the lessons learned in the past and through a more pragmatic and effective approach, support the countries of the region in upgrading their counterterrorism capacities and revitalizing regional counterterrorism cooperation without delay. Mr. President, since last year, countries in the region have been facing multiple challenges such as slowing economic growth, high inflation, food insecurity, and humanitarian crises. These problems are acute in some countries, and their negative impact on the political and the security situation must not be ignored. The Secretary General's report calls for greater attention to those issues and for a holistic approach to addressing the root causes of conflict. UNOWAS should strengthen coordination with relevant country teams, take an integrated approach to both tasks of peace and development, and support the United Nations Support Plan for the Sahel and the strategy for the stabilization, recovery, and rehabilitation of Lake Chad in order to achieve tangible results in the region. Meanwhile, the international community should provide financial and technical support to the countries of the region in terms of infrastructure development, employment, and income generation, with a view to enhancing people's livelihood. Through bilateral and multilateral cooperation under the framework of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation and the Global Development Initiative, China has been providing support to countries in the region to enhance capacity building and achieving inclusive and sustainable development, which will help to gradually build the foundation for lasting peace and stability. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi will go to the region next week, where he will pay a friendly visit to Togo and Cote d'Ivoire. This visit is a continuation of the good tradition of ours over the past 34 years, by which China's foreign minister's first visit abroad in the new year will be to Africa, and it will bring China's contribution to promoting peace and stability in the region. Thank you, Mr. President.
Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of China for that statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. I also thank SRSG Simao and Dr. Thierry Benoni for their insightful briefings today. Malta welcomes the Secretary General's report and expresses gratitude to the SRSG and UNOWAS for their efforts in promoting democratic processes and mitigating crises in an evolving region. We welcome elections held in Nigeria, Liberia, and Guinea-Bissau in 2023. Notably, we recognize the increased representation of women in political and appointed positions in Benin, Sierra Leone, and Côte d'Ivoire, following their recent elections. Looking ahead to 2024, we anticipate elections in Senegal, Mauritania, and Ghana. We call for free, fair, and transparent electoral processes that allow all eligible citizens to participate as voters, candidates, and observers. For those countries under transitional government rule, we urge them to commit to realistic plans of transition and to return to constitutional order without any delay. Specifically, we reiterate our strong call for the immediate and unconditional release of President Mohamed Bazoum of Niger, and we support the way forward proposed at the 64th Extraordinary Session of ECOWAS held last December for restoration of constitutional order in the country. On this note, we reaffirm our support to ECOWAS under Nigeria's current chairmanship as it continues to uphold accountability while offering technical advice and support to transitional processes. President, the dire humanitarian situation compounded by other drivers of conflict, such as political instability, violent extremism, and climate change, demands our urgent attention. The resulting large-scale displacement of populations in the region is extremely worrying. We pay tribute to those humanitarian aid workers and journalists killed in the region, as well as those who persevere despite relentless challenges, including due to a shrinking civic space. We reiterate our call for strengthened protection of those in vulnerable situations, especially women and girls facing gender and sexual-based violence, as well as children who face heightened risk of recruitment, severe acute malnutrition, lack of education due to school closures, and armed conflict. As signatories of the joint pledges on climate, peace, and security, Malta recognizes the pivotal role of risk assessments and preventive measures in addressing climate adverse impacts in the region. We fully support this pillar in the work of UNOWAS and encourage further collaboration with relevant sub-regional fora. President, Malta uses today's occasion to highlight the situation in Mali, particularly following the closure of MINUSMA at the request of the Malian transitional government. The international community must continue to play its part in supporting and safeguarding the well-being of Malian people, as the country is seeing a surge of terrorist attacks and hostilities between the parties of the peace agreement. We call on the transitional government to openly engage with the UN system and to define a new role for UNOWAS and the UN country team in transferring the mission's tasks. To conclude, President, Malta believes in the power of transforming challenges into opportunities in West Africa and the Sahel, a region which holds great potential. It is for this reason that Malta supports increased reporting by the Secretary General, supplemented by briefings to this Council on the region's multidimensional challenges. Our collective goal to overcome these challenges should also lead Council members to adopt the pending presidential statement under this item. I thank you.
Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Malta for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I'm grateful to SRSG Simao and Dr. Thierry Benoni for their briefing this morning. Let me make 4 points on security, democracy, climate change, and humanitarian need. First, as we've heard, security across the Sahel is deteriorating. The UK is particularly concerned about the situation in Mali, where UNOWAS has a crucial role to play after MINUSMA's withdrawal. We encourage UNOWAS, through its good offices, to help bring all signatories to the 2015 Algiers Accords back to the negotiating table. The UK welcomes ECOWAS's contributions to regional security and supports the potential of the AQUA initiative. We also stand ready to support the region and the UN for the upcoming Africa Counterterrorism Summit. We reiterate that the region's security challenges are only exacerbated by the destabilizing chaos of Russian mercenary group Wagner. Second, democracy is under pressure. Timelines for the restoration of constitutional governments in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Guinea continue to slip. We echo ECOWAS's calls for a return to constitutional order, and we encourage recommitment to transition timetables. We call on Niger to agree a transition timeline with ECOWAS and urge adherence to an inclusive and transparent transition in Chad. The United Kingdom congratulates Liberia for its recent peaceful transfer of power and welcomes the Peacebuilding Commission's role supporting this process. We urge redoubled efforts on UNOWAS's regional work to prevent election-related tensions. Third, the Security Council has recognized the adverse effects of climate change on security and stability in the region. We welcome UNOWAS's work in the climate security nexus. The UK is supporting work in the region to build the resilience of those most vulnerable to climate change. And fourth, the humanitarian situation remains dire. Since 2019, the UK aid has supported over 15 million in the Sahel with life-saving assistance. But humanitarian needs are still going unmet. We call on all actors to ensure safe and unimpeded access for humanitarian assistance. In closing, President, in light of the regional challenges we've all set out here today, we should recommit to even closer work with UNOWAS and the regional organisations. We join others in calling for a presidential statement of the Council to reflect this commitment. I thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement. I now call on the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Special Representative, Mr. Shimao, and Ms. Teru Benoni for their briefings today and for their insights. Allow me to express my country's unequivocal support for the work of UNOWAS. We particularly welcome Special Representatives' good offices across the region. The office's work in conflict prevention, mediation, and advocacy proves to be more important than ever, and I would like to reflect upon some important elements emphasized by today's briefers. First, on the importance of democracy. Our own story of transition to a democratic society informs our understanding of the challenges our partners in West Africa face in their efforts to consolidate democratic processes. But it is also our own experience that testifies how integral the support of regional and international partners is to ensure that the road to transition is a successful one. Close coordination between UNOWAS, ECOWAS, and the countries in the transition processes is crucial for a timely return to constitutional order in compliance with the agreed commitments. A great level of caution should be attributed to the shrinking civic and political space in some parts of the region. Giving voices to all segments of society is key to building trust necessary to sustain peace. We encourage the governments and political parties in the region to embrace an inclusive political dialogue with full, equal, safe, and meaningful participation of women and youth. And we value the insights of the Special Representative on good practices in Côte d'Ivoire and Sierra Leone and commend UNOWAS for their work on gender mainstreaming in electoral processes and the implementation of the Council's resolutions on women, peace, and security in the region. Secondly, on the insecurity in the Sahel. Unprecedented levels of insecurity and instability, exacerbated by the threat of terrorist and violent extremist groups and intercommunal violence, are a matter of our great concern. With the withdrawal of MINUSMA from Mali, it is essential that the Council considers reinforcement of the UN efforts through UNOVAS and the UN country team to invest in prevention, peace building, and regional stabilization. We agree with the briefers that the counter-terrorism efforts must go hand in hand with long-term investment in resilient societies and institutions. Slovenia denounces violations of international humanitarian and human rights law in the counter-terrorism operations and calls for investigation and accountability of all actors involved. In order to help prevent the spillover of the insecurity from Sahel to the coastal states, of which we heard today also from the briefers, the European Union launched a new security and defense initiative in support of the countries of the Gulf of Guinea. We also recognize the interconnectedness of the security situation in North Africa and the Sahel. Thirdly, violence and effects of climate change lead to dire food and water insecurity, waterborne diseases, forced displacement, and the deepening of humanitarian crises for millions of people in the Central Sahel. Slovenia is alarmed by the impact of these struggles on the recruitment of children by armed groups, abductions of girls, school closures, and sexual and gender-based violence. The region urgently needs our increased attention on the impact of climate change on peace and security. The need was reaffirmed in the recently adopted landmark declaration on climate security at the Sahel Climate, Peace and Security Forum in Bamako. This leads me to my final point today, Mr. President. Experience from the region shows that only long-term engagement on humanitarian, development, and peace nexus can lead to durable solutions. They must be rooted in conflict-sensitive investments in sustainable development and unquestionable respect for human rights and human dignity. Slovenia joins other members in recognizing the work of UNOVAS in this regard, and we support a 3+1 appeal for a new presidential statement that would show the Council's support for the region and for the efforts of Mr. Shimao's team. Thank you.
Je remercie.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador. Thank you, President. I thank Special Representative Santos Simão and Dr. Teru Benoni for their informative briefings this morning, and I'd also like to thank the Secretariat for the detailed report on recent events in the region. I will briefly refer to three main aspects: institutionality, security, and humanitarian fallout of insecurity. Firstly, Ecuador believes that solid and stable institutions will improve the living conditions of people in the long term and effectively address the root causes of violence. In recent years, there has been a proliferation of changes of government in the region outside of constitutional order without a reduction in violence or an improvement in living conditions. Clearly, instability is harmful for security and development. Any attempt to disrupt constitutional order is to be condemned, in particular the coup d'etat carried out in Niger, and we call and join others in calling for a prompt return to democratic order. Ecuador welcomes recent important steps taken to consolidate democratic processes and institutions through the holding of peaceful elections in recent months, particularly in Côte d'Ivoire and Liberia. Ecuador also appreciates and supports the efforts of ECOWAS to restore constitutional order in Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, and Niger. We must reiterate our appeal for fulfillment with agreed commitments and a respect for established timetables. Secondly, security. We are following with concern the ever worsening situation in Central Sahel. regarding security, particularly in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, and the persistent threat of violent terrorist violence is spreading to the south. Ecuador reiterates its unequivocal condemnation of any terrorist act, and we express our solidarity with victims of violence. We also recall that in combating terrorism, states must respect international law, international humanitarian law, the rights of refugees, and international human rights law. The role of UNOWAS in the region is of vital importance, and therefore, in the case of Mali, we would call for the Security Council to continue to coordinate with this regional body and share information on the situation in this country once MINUSMA has ended its role. The end of initiatives such as the Group of Five of the Sahel is disturbing. Terrorism is a scourge which transcends borders, and therefore it requires international cooperation. For that reason, we welcome the efforts which have been carried out in this regard. We also believe it is necessary to continue with these efforts to maintain maritime security in the Gulf of Guinea. Finally, and thirdly, I would mention the humanitarian fallout of insecurity. In all contexts of violence, the most vulnerable sectors are disproportionately affected, namely women, youth, children, and older persons, and the situation in the Sahel is no exception. Of particular concern is the number of people in need of humanitarian assistance. It has reached 6.1 million last year, and that represents a 24% increase over 2022. Ecuador reiterates its support for the work of UNOWAS, the entire UN system, and ECOWAS to mitigate the humanitarian needs and to play a key role of coordination with governments, always bearing in mind the principle of national ownership at all levels. Joint work by countries of the region is essential to address the underlying causes of violence, and in this way to disrupt the vicious cycle of unrest in order to work towards development and to building sustainable peace. Thank you, President. I thank the representative of Ecuador for his statement. I now give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we thank the Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for West Africa and the Sahel, Mr. Leonard Simao, for presenting his report on the current situation in the region and the activities of his office over the past year. We also listened closely to Ms. Lorianta Rubinoni. The situation in the Sahara-Sahel region is not improving, and this is primarily due to the growing terrorist threat. The growing fighting capacity of the Islamic State in West Africa is complicating the security situation in the countries of the Lake Chad Basin. The situation remains tense in northeastern Nigeria as well as in Chad, where the authorities are forced to deal not only with fighting jihadists, but also with the issues of providing for numerous refugees from neighboring Sudan, as well as addressing their own domestic challenges. Terrorist organizations in the Sahel region are gradually expanding their area of operations towards the states of the Gulf of Guinea, including Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, and Togo. The epicenter of tensions remains the border areas of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, located in the so-called Liptako-Gourma Triangle. Jihadists from the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara, as well as Jamaat Nasr al-Islam wal-Muslimin, or JNIM, are becoming more active. Thus, on November 26, 2023, a large JNIM formation attempted to seize a village in Djibo in northern Burkina Faso. On December 3rd, 2023, fighters from both terrorist organizations launched a time-coordinated attack on military garrisons in 4 Malian cities in the eastern and central regions. Achieving long-term stabilization requires the collective support of the international community for Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, which have become the vanguard of the fight against trans-African terrorist groups. We welcome their coordinated efforts to combat terrorists. We consider the persistent actions of external players aimed at ousting the undesirable transitional leadership of those countries, including by using their levers of influence in the region, to be destructive. It is important for ECOWAS to establish a dialogue with the three states, overcome internal divisions, and focus on addressing common threats in the region. We hope that the community's lifting of the travel ban on the authorities of the Sahelian states will finally lead to the establishment of long-awaited cooperation in the region without the use of ultimatums and sanctions. We are particularly alarmed by the humanitarian situation in Niger, and we believe that restoring economic ties is important both for the population of the country itself as well as its neighbors in the region. We're of the view that the leading role in maintaining peace and security in the Sahara-Sahel region should be played by the states of the region themselves. In this context, we believe that the course taken by the authorities of Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger towards comprehensive integration is justified. An important element of this was the conclusion of an agreement by these states on September 16th, 2023 on mutual security commitments. The increased cooperation among the three Sahelian states is already yielding positive results. Their armed forces are conducting effective joint counterterrorism operations. For Mali, a key milestone was the restoration of control over the town of Kidal. This result was achieved by the Malian military in the difficult context of the drawdown of the United Nations stabilization mission and the dissolution of the G5 Sahel. At the same time, it is important that the transitional authorities in Burkina Faso, Guinea, and Mali are committed to their obligations to comply with the agreed timeframes for a return to constitutional order. Having said that, we understand the need to push back the elections in Mali for technical reasons from early 2024 to a later date. We note Bamako's efforts to conduct political and institutional reforms and adopt a new constitution. The completion of the transitional period in these states must take place without imposing foreign prescriptions and be based on sober, realistic assessments of the situation. These are the principles that guide our country in providing bilateral assistance to those who require it. We believe that it is unnecessary to establish additional reporting linked to the situation in the Sahel or its individual states. We believe that the reports of the Secretary General on UNOWAS sufficiently cover the issues of the region at this stage. We support the activities of the office in this regard. For our part, we will continue contributing constructively to the efforts of the international community aimed at achieving stability in the Sahel-Sahara region. We will continue to provide assistance to Sahelian states on a bilateral and multilateral basis, including in the areas of enhancing the military capabilities of national armed forces, training of military and law enforcement personnel, as well as the provision of humanitarian assistance. Thank you for your attention.
Je remercie la représentante.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank SRSG Siman and Dr. Piero Beroni for their briefings. Japan applauds the continued laudable work of UNOWAS. As we see persisting challenges in West Africa and the Sahel, UNOWAS's good offices and its work enhancing regional cooperation enhancing regional cooperation and promoting good governance, the rule of law, human rights, and gender mainstreaming remains as important as ever. In this regard, it is high time for the Security Council to speak in one voice to support UNOWAS's mission through the adoption of the presidential statement. Mr. President, for sustainable peace and stability in the region, Japan emphasizes again the centrality of democracy and good governance. We welcome some positive political developments in the region, including the conducting of a peaceful election in Liberia. At the same time, the region continues to be marked by heightening political tensions, shrinking civic and political space, and instability, such as military takeover in Niger last July. A timely and swift return to constitutional order in Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, and Niger is pivotal, and Japan encourages UNOWAS and the UN country teams to assist in this endeavor. Further deterioration of the security situation in the region is gravely worrying, as well as its spillover effect to the littoral states of the Gulf of Guinea. Japan notes with concern the upsurge in clashing and violence in Mali and its impact of civilians in the wake of MINUSMA's withdrawal. In combating terrorism and violent extremism, Japan commends the concerted efforts by regional partners, including through the Accra initiatives and the Multinational Joint Task Force. Taking this opportunity, as MINUSMA completed its withdrawal, Japan applauds the dedication shown by the leadership and personnel over the past decades. Continued insecurity in worsening the already dire human rights and humanitarian situation. Japan deplores the closure of so many hospitals and schools. The latter not only robs children's right to education, but leaves them vulnerable to recruitment by armed groups and to sexual exploitation. We must also tackle the adverse effects of climate change and environmental degradation, which are compounding the existing vulnerabilities. Mr. President, in tackling the multiplying and deepening challenges the region is facing, adopting a humanitarian development peace nexus approach is essential. Inclusiveness is also key, reflecting the voices of various actors, including women and youth, who are most affected. Japan, on its part, will continue to support the region, placing human security at the center of our efforts. Lastly, given MINUSMA's withdrawal and the announcement of the decision to dissolve the G5 Sahel, the Council is expected to have fewer opportunities to discuss the Sahel region. However, considering the challenges the region faces, now is not the time for the Council to lessen its attention and visibility, but remain actively engaged. Japan stands ready to work constructively with our fellow Council members to find the best way forward. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Japan for her statement. I shall now make a further statement in my capacity as the representative of France. I thank the special representative and Madame Benoni for their contributions. West Africa and the Sahel have had to face many challenges over the past year. Political crises, the breakdown of constitutional order in Niger, and the withdrawal of MINUSMA under difficult conditions after a 10-year presence. France's thoughts are with the populations made vulnerable by these situations, and particularly with the 26 million people in need of humanitarian assistance. However, there were some positive developments to be noted, such as those in Côte d'Ivoire and Liberia, where elections were held in a transparent, inclusive, and peaceful manner, with a significant increase in women's participation. In Gambia, efforts were made to set up the Truth, Reconciliation, and Reparations Commission. France welcomes the mobilization of ECOWAS, which is working tirelessly to promote democracy and a return to constitutional order in all the countries where it has been undermined. France encourages UNOWAS to pursue its efforts in support of regional organization to promote the rule of law, good governance, and human rights. National political situations must not lead us to lose sight of the cross-cutting threats that continue to affect West Africa. I refer in particular to terrorism, maritime insecurity, food insecurity, and climate change. These are challenges that all require collective action on our part. The statement made by Council members who signed the Climate, Peace, and Security Pledge at the start of this meeting attests to this. On all of these aspects, France will continue to collaborate with the stakeholders in the region who wish to do so within a framework of respect for international law and the Charter of the United Nations. It will continue to call for the continued attention of this Council. Thank you very much.
Les fonctions de président du Conseil. Il n'y a plus d'oratrice ou d'orateur inscrits sur la liste. J'invite à présent les membres du Conseil à poursuivre l'examen de la question dans le cadre de brèves consultations. La séance est levée.
Brief consultation.